Today on the How to Japanese podcast, I am talking with patent attorney Brian Epstein. He's been my biggest hype man for a Japan Times article I wrote about how to write emails in Japanese. We talk about that, how to communicate with Japanese business partners, and some of the intricacies of patent law. Brian has also been extremely active virtually during the pandemic, so there are some interesting thoughts from him about how to connect with partners in Japan even when you can't get over there. Brian Epstein is a patent attorney who has been working with Japanese clients and patent attorneys for his 14-year career. Brian has visited Japan about 15 times. He started his own practice in 2019 and plans to visit again shortly after the borders reopen. It's fitting that he's a guest on the podcast because he was actually the person I sound tested my setup with before I recorded episodes for the first season. So thanks for coming on today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So this season I'm starting pretty broadly, and everybody I'm talking to is at a different level of Japanese. But how have you learned Japanese so far?
Not well, unfortunately. The process began while I was in law school. There were a couple of former JET teachers that were in school with me, and they decided to have some, weekly sessions where we would discuss stuff. But it was pretty unstructured, and the attendance wasn't very routine, and so I didn't learn a ton, but I knew a couple of phrases and kind of like menu type stuff. When I went to my first law firm, there was actually part of the reason I was drawn there was that they had a major Japan practice, and they have trainees. They host trainees from Japanese companies for several months, and some of the trainees were asked to begin giving Japanese lessons once a week, and so that was pretty good. We used and we also had Japanese paralegals that would teach us, and so we were using, I think the book is called Japanese for Busy People.
Sure.
And so we did that, and I got some experience with that. I bought Rosetta Stone to kind of study on my own time, but never really got past the first few lessons of that. And if I'm trying to make a little bit more effort right now during the pandemic. I'm
Sure.
studying hiragana. And I've got a copy of Genki, but it's hard to add in foreign language study while you're busy working a busy job.
For sure. And so that sounds like a really interesting way to learn it with these Japanese trainees who are coming in. They're not doing a law degree, if I'm right? They're doing a 1-year program or something like that. I've heard of that before.
So there's different, different people mean different things by it, but typically what we're really discussing is a particular visa. You can come in for, I think it's 3 months without a visa,
mm-hmm.
But if you have it's literally called a trainee visa. I'm not an immigration attorney, so I don't know it super well, but I think it's for 1 year maybe. And you submit to the government some paperwork explaining the course of study, and they can extend their stay that way.
Great. And the Busy for Japanese for Busy People text, that's mostly like spoken phrases and kind of basic information like that.
Yeah, certainly that's what we used it for. I was a very young associate at the time and didn't really know any kana or kanji, and so I wouldn't have been in position to use written really. I think at that point too, I also did not yet have my Japanese secretary. Mm-hmm. Eventually, I would start working with one, and so she helped as well. But a lot of it was more for conversation type stuff.
Sure. And so at that point, had you been to Japan before?
No, I think I went for my first time in 2010, and that would have been after a lot of this.
Okay. And we can cut this out if you're not comfortable talking about it, but do you mind
Sure.
sharing which law school you went to?
I went to George Washington.
George Washington.
It's totally fine.
And they have a very specific program related to Japan, it sounds like.
No, well, they might. So there's certainly, so law schools often have like a international law type thing, and there are certainly law students that imagine themselves practicing international law, but a lot of times they're teased because there is no such thing as international law.
Mm.
There's just, there's whatever country you're in and whatever country you're trying to work in, and there's not really, unless you're practicing at like the International Court of Justice, there's not really this thing that's called international. So anyway, so there is a professor there who focused on, I believe, East Asia generally, but a little bit more specifically Japanese practice, Japanese law, and I took a course with him, and that might have been how I got the introduction to these jet teachers.
Got it.
Former jet teachers.
Interesting. And so the first time you go to Japan is after that, after 2010, you said. So what was that like? And you had a little bit of exposure to the language.
So that was awesome. That was the one time I went on vacation. The other trips have all been business. So I started in Tokyo for a few days. Went over to so it's what you and I would call Osaka, but really
Yep.
it's Ikeda, and stayed at a ryokan there. Went up to, I had a JR pass.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really trying to take advantage of that. I went up to Kaga Onsen
Yep.
to spend a night there. I went to Kanazawa to see Kenroku-en, and then came back down to Tokyo for like another day, and then flew out. So it was pretty, I covered a lot of the country considering how few days it was.
Yeah.
But that was a blast. There were no, I was on vacation, so.
Yeah. Kanazawa is still somewhere I have not spent enough time. I've got there. I've only been to the train station basically, but had about 5 minutes to walk around outside. So, but yeah, in terms of the language, is there any encounters you remember happening during that trip that it tied into the studying you had done?
That tied it. Man, that's a tough one.
Or like any language you remember using or being surprised by, anything like that?
I can tell you I was surprised by how much English everyone spoke.
Oh,
Yeah, it's, man, is there any Japanese that I used? Not really. I mean, most people have very low expectations for, foreigners
hmm
speaking Japanese, and certainly, in the ryokan owners in Kaga actually spoke like fluent English, which was crazy.
hmm
Um, I even remarked, I'm like, how are you how did you learn like, fluent English in Kaga? Um, and in Ikeda there was a little bit of an issue because it was a very Japanese ryokan, and so it wasn't one that was really set up for foreign tourists. But by and large, like we didn't really have any problems.
Okay, got it. So had you been interested in Japan before law school? Was it somewhere you wanted to go, or was that encounter one of the things that kind of got you connected with the country?
I had been interested, so I get this question a lot, and I don't really know when it started.
Sure.
The earliest I can kind of pinpoint for you would be, probably like probably late 80s, like 89 or so. With video games at that point was a major source of Japanese influence.
Sure.
Um, I think by the time I got to middle school would have been when, God, it's been a few years. I think it was the Sci-Fi Channel at that point was
Yep.
doing like, um, I think it was like once a year would have like a bunch of anime on. And so we'd tape it and, like trade it at school and stuff. You go to like Blockbuster or whatever, and, there might have been some copyright violations there too.
Mm,
And, I mean, that was just a way of gaining exposure. And, nowadays it's so different with the internet and all this stuff. But back then, like that was pretty good. I think I checked out Shogun by the time I was um, early in high school from the library.
got it.
The long book. I still haven't seen the series, and certainly that's not the most accurate thing. But it's again back then that was pretty good for a
Yeah.
high school kid.
No, yeah. I mean, it's interesting how I'm reading Matt Alt's new book, Pure Invention. And I'm just getting started into it, but it's interesting to think about how Japan's presence has changed over time, and it was kind of very quiet yet steady during 80s and 90s, and I think I mean my interest developed the same way, and then um, but yeah, that's interesting to hear. And then so yeah, I want to talk about law school too. So it sounds like you had that one professor who was doing some work related to East Asia. Um, Looking back, I mean, I'm not that familiar with a law school curriculum, but I assume that there are some electives that you are able to choose and some required courses. Looking back, is there anything you did that you thought was effective, kind of pointing you towards work with Japan, or is there anything you would do differently if you could go back and do law school again, knowing that you would end up working closely with uh, Japanese companies, Japanese clients?
Yeah. So the most practical one, because I'm going to give you an impractical one in a second, and I think that that one's actually much more important in a lot of ways. But the more practical one would be, if you have an opportunity to learn about, so the U.S. and England and like basically like the UK empire has what we call the common law, and it's this judge-made law that we apply, and a lot of the rest of the world works under what we call civil law. So that's like France and Japan's one of those countries too. And I do not understand how the civil law works. Like I kind of get it conceptually, but I just don't have a real deep appreciation for it. And a lot of the questions I get about U.S. practice actually start from that point. The people asking the questions don't know that. But when I sit down and I think about like, what the heck is going on? Like, why are you asking me this? Um, it comes down to just a basic difference in the legal system. Um, and the whole point in working internationally, in my view, is being able to explain. It's really a process of self-examination. It's being able to step back from yourself and figure out like why is what I do weird, right? Because when people meet each other, they're always like, "Oh, well, I do it correctly, and you must be the one that's doing it wrong." If you're going to be an effective, I think anything probably
Hmm. Sure.
internationally, but attorney or business person or whatever, you really need to be able to step back from yourself and say, "Look, from this other person's point of view, I'm the one that's doing it strangely, and so why do I do it this strange way?" So, so I think that answers the more practical question of um, what courses would I take? Anything that's East Asia obviously would be good.
Sure.
But the more slightly impractical thing that's been far more influential to me is I took a course on it's called Racism and American Law, and it was phenomenal because it taught me how to critically think, and that's really been crucial for me in terms of just everything because you know, a lot of other law courses focus on how to do that one particular type of law and, maybe some of the issues, and they're trying to give you some familiarity. But the point of that um, racism course was kind of like to teach you how to think on your own. And, when you're given these laws that, conflict or whatever it is, to really step back and say, like, how do I teach this? How do I implement this? What would be fair? That sort of thing. And so that course was far more influential. So if I'm giving advice to law students, I would definitely say take some courses outside of your what you would expect to practice in. Um, and just because that diversity will really help you. The other course that has helped a bit um, along those lines is taxation. I
Mm.
don't do anything with tax, but just that kind of analysis and teaching yourself and something enjoyable that's not really will be your day-to-day focus when you get into practice. That was a great one too.
Interesting. I mean, that's really fascinating. I've got two follow-up questions kind of on what you just talked about. The first is in terms of the civil versus common law, do you have an example of like what kind of questions you're getting asked? Is there something that might, what kind of question would come from that difference? Is there something you could give us to like kind of hold on to?
Sure. So so I'm not entirely sure on this one because like I said, I don't understand the civil law that well.
Hmm.
But when Japanese applicants, or I'm sorry, when applicants, because they might be American, but when applicants at the Japanese Patent Office appeal, the appeal board there reviews the entire case, what we call de novo. I don't actually know if that's what they call it, but what I think it's what Americans would call de
Mm.
novo. And what that means is that the judges basically review the case as if they were the patent examiners themselves.
Okay.
And so, as a result, they not only disagree with the examiner, but I believe the statistic is that they grant a patent 60% of the time. So they're disagreeing with the examiner at least 60% of the time, right? Because the reason they're hearing it is that the application was rejected and the applicant has asked for them to intervene. So at least 60% of the time they're reversing their examiner. In contrast, in the United States, the our analogous appeal board that's within the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, they will review only the contested matters in a patent prosecution
Mm.
for de novo, and I really want to emphasize um, the contested matters portion because uh, if you don't contest that a particular issue, then you basically waive your arguments towards it. And although the board can still consider those uncontested matters, they'll change their standard of review to looking for error on the part of the examiners. So Japanese applicants expect so overall the uh, PTAB, the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, upholds the examiners around 60% of the time.
Okay.
Um, so there's
It's
no
the
patent,
opposite.
right? It's basically flipped. And so that's been a big question from Japanese applicants is not so much the difference in the percentages, but I'm trying to explain issues on appeal to Japanese applicants, and they're kind of they wonder. I don't always agree with the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, the PTAB, and so they're wondering like what why don't you agree with them and why are they doing this? And I'm like, look, they're only looking at the contested issues. Like if there's a major issue that's not contested, they're just not going to address it. And I, as some third party commentator, I can't force the applicant to pick a particular fight with the PTAB, right? I
Sure.
can't get involved. So um, I'm not positive that that's a civil/common law issue because,
Okay.
like I said, but I think it is.
Okay. But those are the kinds of questions you're getting. That's interesting. And then the other follow up question I had about the law school courses was a little bit about that race and racism course. I'd be curious to know, like, in what ways did it help you think critically? Is there anything that really stands out that was kind of eye-opening or surprising?
Man, it's kind of hard to remember. It's been like 14 years. I mean, there's
Sure.
definitely a lot of stuff, over time. And so my professor was Paul Butler, and he was outstanding. I think he's at Georgetown now. And he is a grad of Harvard Law, if I remember correctly, and took, I believe it's Derek Bell's courses are who influenced us most directly. And so it's just that kind of writing. I mean, it's been unfortunately a little long, and as
Sure.
we discussed, I just got my COVID vaccine, so I'm a little
Ah,
lightheaded today. But
no, no worries.
but it's that kind of just real critical thinking of like, look, when these laws are implemented, are they, a lot of times these racial questions just aren't on the face of it, and so you have to kind of like dig a little bit deeper of like, look, who is this really affecting? Is
Sure.
this really fair? That sort of stuff.
Got it. Okay. No, that's super helpful. That was, I think, a really helpful answer. Yeah. Um, Man, this is already super interesting. So, how did you decide to get into patent work in particular?
So, my undergraduate degree is in electrical engineering, and there's kind of a saying in law school of like, if you can do patent law, you do patent law,
Huh.
because it's pretty um, difficult to get in. There's a high barrier to entry. Specifically, you have to have an undergraduate degree in um,
Okay. Got it. Yeah.
like an engineering or science field, right? I mean, it's not 100% required, but it is. It, otherwise you need enough coursework to show that you could have got, that sort of thing. So there's kind of this higher bar to entry. People typically don't take one of those degree courses and then end up in law school. So there's, although there's plenty of engineers who become eligible to become patent agents, um, far fewer of them then take the step to go into law school to become full patent attorneys. Um, and so, we just there's this barrier to entry that doesn't exist for,
Sure.
let's say, trademark attorneys or contracts attorneys.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, that reminds me. This is totally off topic, but there's a guy in Chicago who runs a yeast lab. He got his undergraduate degree in, I think, biology, or maybe even a PhD in biology, but then went to, yeah, I think it was a PhD, then went to law school and was doing law work, and then decided to open a yeast lab and realized he could, create different strains of yeast and patent them, and they're having a lot of success. So I think that's another example of specialization and having that science background. I hadn't thought about that. That's interesting.
Yep.
And so you've opened your own practice right now, which is interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that decision? Were you working with Japanese clients before you did that? And can you tell me about the decision to open your own practice?
Yeah. So, when I got out of law school, I was looking for different jobs, and I guess ultimately the three firms I was considering all had a Japanese practice, but one in particular really emphasized it, and so that's the one I ultimately went to. The you know You and I kind of exist in this somewhat of a bubble, I guess, where we think that the whole world enjoys Japan as much as we do,
Sure.
and that's just not. Unfortunately, that's just not the truth. And so, a lot of U.S. law firms don't want to engage in international practice, or if they do, they want to choose a country where maybe there's a common language like the UK or something, or Australia. It gets more and more selective until you find someone that really focuses on Japanese practice. And I didn't know that I wanted to concentrate in Japanese practice at that point, of course, because I'd never worked with Japanese clients, but I certainly wanted some exposure to it. And so I went there, and they give you that firm gives you a little taste of everything. I definitely serve some European clients, for example, but they're kind of trying to slot you into just kind of find a good fit for you, in terms of like how you work and how the clients work and how the law firm serves those clients. And I pretty quickly got um, a very intense docket focusing on Japanese clients, and three in particular, and even more so than the three, than really one. When I started poking around on some of the client data, and most of the attorneys had their major client comprise, their single biggest client would usually comprise about 30% of their docket. Um, One person who was really concentrated was 50%. Another one was like 70, and I was at 90 with
Ugh,
my one client. So, I mean, when I
wow.
tell you I was very concentrated on one client. And so they were Japanese, and I love them, and they seem to like me, and they're not a client currently, but we still keep in touch. And it's definitely a different way of doing business. And I would go on to work with um, different Japanese clients in different um, ways. I've also sent work to Japan on behalf of an American firm, a different American firm, and I just like it. As I learn more and more about the way they do business, like I can't tell you it's the way I would have come up with on my own. It's certainly a little bit different than how we do stuff in the U.S., but as you learn it, it's very it kind of makes sense. It's just a different set of values and how you weigh different concerns. And I think, um, and I would imagine that you agree. As a group, Japanese people tend to really appreciate as you show interest in them as a foreigner. I mean, I think everybody does, right? I mean, if somebody was coming from Germany into the United States and showed an appreciation for American things, people would show 'em more and more American stuff.
Sure. And the more local you
Um,
get, the better, obviously, right? Like if you come to Chicago and you're interested in things from St. Louis, you're not going to get along with people as well as if you're interested in the White Sox or something like that.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And I think that's you know very true in Japan too. Of like, hey, if you're into us, like we'll show you a little bit more. We'll deeper. You go deeper into the onion, I guess. And there's all these layers, and it's been really rewarding for me. I really enjoy it.
Great. And then, yeah, what about opening your own practice? Was that difficult? I mean, for me, as somebody whose business is not something I've really done, and law definitely not. It seems like it would be complicated, but maybe it's not.
No, I've spoken to some other people that have started their own firms, and the general consensus is it's basically a table, a laptop, and an internet connection is how you get started.
Mm,
So in terms of the overhead, it's real low. There are definitely some things that Japanese clients want to see more than American clients do. Like American clients literally don't care if you're at your kitchen table. Japanese clients definitely want to have some knowledge that you have like an actual office space behind it. Um, they need to see the web page a little bit more. They need to see the domain, I think, a little bit more than some American clients might. It's just a different set of business norms and stuff. Um, but the real killer for me was that, I basically started my own firm just prior to COVID starting, and
mm.
had taken a trip to Japan that didn't go so great. And as a result, I didn't really get a chance to meet a lot of my potential clients in person. And so, it's been the pandemic has certainly complicated it, but the decision to do it was easy. Actually, starting it wasn't that hard. It's just kind of a question of, how do I overcome that cultural difference of, really wanting to meet people in person before they send you work.
Yeah, I mean, man, I can't emphasize enough how much that in-person social aspect of business, how important that is in Japan. Uh, I mean, they really love that interaction. They love celebrating things like that. So, um, I mean, it sounds like that trip didn't go well. Is there anything that did go well that you could point to, like a pinpoint out of that trip that you thought was successful?
Not on the trip, no.
Oh
The trip involved an expired passport, so I didn't actually
no!
take it. I mean, I got there, but was quickly turned back around.
Oh no!
Uh,
Oh, what a nightmare!
yeah. So, um, so no, I can't tell you anything about the trip that went well.
But what about in terms of the something that has gone well in terms of your work with Japanese clients that you think you've done successfully?
During the pandemic or generally?
Just in general, yeah, like past. It doesn't not even with your own firm, any time previously or during the pandemic as well.
Um, Man, I'd love to toot my horn about overall, but I think maybe the pandemic's the more interesting thing.
Okay.
So what would I say? So, there's so what we've discussed so far is how important it is to go in person and visit. And for someone starting their own business, that's a very capital intensive way to start a business. It's one thing if you are an attorney fresh out of law school or fresh out of a different firm and you're setting up shop um, at your kitchen table with your laptop. It's another one to be like, okay, I've got to go drop whatever it is, $5,000 to $10,000 on a trip to Japan, and then I'm going to come back and in 3 to 6 months I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again until I have enough clients to really get a firm going.
Yeah.
That's tough. That's probably not manufacturing levels of investment, but it's getting there.
Hmm.
So what I considered was, you know, eh, I don't have a ton of capital at the moment because of the pandemic, and even if I did, I wouldn't really be able to do anything with it. So I was like, well, what can I do instead to kind of get some exposure and overcome the fact that like these potential clients don't really know me as a person. Um, I definitely sent out some emails to people being like, requesting video conferences and stuff, and people weren't really that interested in just a how do you do kind of call. Um, but I found that people were very interested in like seminars and that type of stuff,
Hmm.
and particularly because these, you know, the, for the attorneys that do want to go practice in Japan, right? Because like I said, like I would say even most American attorneys don't. But for those that do, they all go over and they all offer seminars. And suddenly, all of these Japanese applicants were like, hey, we don't know what's going on in the US anymore. No one's coming to teach us this stuff. And how do we find, quality content online to keep our knowledge current and accurate? And so that's kind of where the YouTube channel came in. Was
Hmm.
it gave me an opportunity to instead of having a capital intensive introduction to my potential clients, it's more of a labor intensive one,
Got it.
right? Because I haven't been 100% busy during the pandemic. A lot of us have seen our work scale back a little bit. And so I took some of that free time and put it into developing this content. It gives me an opportunity to show my personality to people. There's a recording of it, so it's not a one-time seminar. It is for me, but it's not like, oh, well, we didn't see Brian while he's in Tokyo, so guess we won't see him again for 6 months or whatever. It's like, no, you can go watch it. Your friend can watch it. Next week or whatever. Like
Yeah.
it's a permanent document.
Yeah. I mean, I've taken a look at some of these, and the content goes way over my head. But could you give a loose idea to people, like a quick summary? How would you summarize what you're providing with the YouTube videos?
In terms of my business needs, or in terms of what in terms of what the attendees see.
Yeah, what they see. What is this product you're creating do for a potential client?
Sure. So I have two different video series. So the one that's kind of my labor focus, I guess, reviews decisions from the PTAB, that appeal board that I discussed earlier, focused on artificial intelligence and machine learning cases.
Okay.
And we walk through it, and then I give some analysis as to how I would do it, or different routes, or considerations for these cases so far haven't been Japanese in origin, and likely won't be for quite a while, if ever. And so so it's not their cases, but to give a sense of like how I would have done it had I been that client's representative.
Got it.
The other video series is more like practice tips, couched in the sense of, look, before these cases go up to this appeal board, they're examined by a U.S. Patent examiner. And it's kind of like, explaining how to really interact with these examiners.
Got it.
It's called, what I do is called ex parte prosecution.
Okay.
And so in the sense of there's no adverse party, it just feels like the examiner's adverse to you.
Got it, because you're being, yeah, okay.
Right.
Because they're mean.
Right, they're rejecting you. And so a lot of patent attorneys get upset at the examiners, and I don't think that's the way. So that series generally takes a favorable view of examiners and explains, like, look, this is how you should treat them with respect and dignity.
Got it. That's really interesting. I mean, I can imagine, like, how do Japanese companies react, like, when they have a patent rejected? Do they react differently than European clients, or?
Yeah, I mean, everyone acts differently because everyone, patents are national in scope typically, and I mean, the EPO kind of jumps to mind as a European Patent Office, as kind of an exception. But people typically know the rules of the country in which they live because of concerns like citizenship and stuff like that. And so then we start expanding our practice areas to look at international, like maybe we send cases to Japan, maybe receive cases from Japan, and we're trying to learn a different set of rules, but there's no real ability to, it's just a question of reps almost, of like, look, if I do 6 prosecutions a week in the US and 2 a month in Japan, then like I'm just never going to know Japanese practice as well as I understand US practice. So I think we are. Sorry, what was the question again exactly? What the?
Oh yeah,
what the value of Japanese clients
do
is?
they react? How do they react when a patent's rejected? Is it?
How do they react?
I mean, this is obviously, I don't want to characterize broadly, but do you?
Sure. No, I think it's. But I mean, people are people, so
Yeah.
we're all gonna. So I think generally speaking, Japanese applicants act like they've received a rejection from the Japanese patent office.
Okay.
Which is totally different. And the U.S. has this really weird way of interpreting patent claims. We're somewhat unique in the world in that regard. And that's a lot of what I see is Japanese benrishi usually trying to submit Japanese style arguments to the U.S. Patent Office, and that's inefficient.
And you try and, I guess, the role of U.S. attorneys would be to help make that process more efficient, help them understand the process, and get them to the right argumentation, the right tone, even maybe.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Some of us, I mean, different clients want to be represented in different ways. And some of them want you to just do exactly what they tell you. And so you're more of a post office in that sense. And so, certainly I offer that service. Other clients want you to just do what you think is best. They give you a lot of freedom, which is what I really enjoy about Japanese practice sometimes. And so you can do whatever you want. And sometimes it's in between. They don't want you to do exactly what they're telling you, but they want you to figure out what it is they're trying to get at, and then you implement that spirit, as in the best way you can as an American practitioner.
Got it. That's really interesting. And I'm also curious about, you said you had hired a Japanese secretary. What was that process like? And um, what's the our work arrangement like? Is it any different than hiring someone in the US?
She was in the U.S. This was at she's just Japanese origin.
Got it. Oh, okay, okay. And she's fluent. And
Yeah, she's Japanese.
has that changed things? Your interactions with clients?
Yeah, I would say it does. I mean, I think I think again, I think anyone would be happy to know that there's somebody there who can consult on cultural issues if there's some
Sure.
sort of business misunderstanding, and give some advice in case something isn't there, to kind of let you know about expectations. Um, I think it just smooths the whole process a little bit more.
Definitely. I mean, that kind of leads me into, I think, one of the last topics I want to get to before my final set of questions, which is just kind of intercultural communication in general. I mean, I've been away from Japan for now 11 years. And so, doing the writing for the Japan Times and stuff like that has required a lot more kind of research to kind of gain the level of immersion that you might get naturally in Japan. And so I think we both have an appreciation for the Japanese email form, which is one of the articles I think I did for the Japan Times, and that you said has been particularly effective for you. But I remember at the time when I wrote that, it came from a place of not knowing, of knowing a little bit of how it worked. And then I started digging a little deeper and found this what I called this sandwich that you fill with the content, but you have to kind of provide the bread on either side of the email message. Tell me a little bit about how you've used that.
Oh man, that's everything. That's my service. Well, I can tell you this. How about this one? So I was working with a Japanese cultural consultant, to at the beginning of the pandemic, to try and ensure that when I contacted some of these potential clients, that I was doing so in you know basically shooting my best shot,
Okay.
because it's kind of like a one time thing of like, hey, I'm just announcing my new law firm, want to tell you about these videos, and like, I might not hear from them ever again. I might not contact them again, for the pandemic was starting, so who knows how long it'll be before I can say like, hey, I'm coming to Japan to visit. um like, these are real, like, shoot your shot type thing, and I'm paying somebody quite a bit of money to review these emails. And she had never, I mean, I think she had provided this kind of service before to other people, but I don't think she'd ever provided it to someone with. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, because certainly there are a lot of people that know this stuff a lot better than I ever will. But at least she hadn't provided it to somebody with my knowledge before. Um,
Hmm.
which, I mean, I've been there 15 times. Like, I know a little bit. And so she was taking a look at the email, and she even came back and she's like, Brian, your emails are like the coolest thing I've ever seen. Because she's like, they are equally Japanese and American.
Oh wow.
And she's like, you do a good job of, like, the structure is very Japanese. She's like, your sentences are short, your paragraphs are short. You don't come out and say anything too strongly, like, very direct. Um, you introduce yourself at the beginning. This is Brian Epstein from, Modal PLC, that sort of thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm always obliged for your assistance. Sometimes I don't always do the seasonal greeting, but I sometimes do, particularly with someone I haven't spoken to before. Um, I don't use the American kinds of sign-offs of, like, if you have any questions or concerns. It's more like a, you know, yoroshiku onegaishimasu type closing.
Okay.
They're very Japanese style emails, and they take me quite a while to write as a result.
Yep.
Um, but and it's deceptive too, because some of the advice I once received was like, Brian, like, this is from a Japanese person, was like, Brian, you can probably write emails at one third your current length. And so that's kind of my challenge is like I write my email and then I go in and I'm like, okay, how do I try and chop it down by 2/3?
Sure.
And
Was that feedback from an American or someone a Japanese?
a Japanese person.
Oh, okay, okay.
And because especially as attorneys, we're trying to our value proposition is very different, I think. We try to show people how not necessarily how knowledgeable we are, but like, how we're paying attention to issues on their behalf and preventing them from making mistakes. And that's just not the way, maybe American clients appreciate that more, but I think Japanese clients tend to want to be more clear and direct of like, here's the what you should do.
Mm.
And they're not really going, they'll come back to you if they have concerns about implementing that, but they're just going to do that most of the time. I think American clients tend to be a bit more like, all right, well, I don't like that option, so what other options do I have? And so you have to kind of lay out more of them and kind of explain a little bit more of why you're choosing something.
And you do that concisely. Yeah, I kind of see that would be a challenge. Yeah. But yeah, that
Yeah.
short paragraph thing, that's super interesting to me. I mean, yeah, the introducing yourself at the beginning almost every time. It's funny now that I've been doing I've been doing a lot more business emails over the last 3 years. I have people that I email now that I don't do that with, but if it was more infrequent, if I was emailing them once every quarter instead of once every 2 weeks, I would definitely be, done you to this at the front of the email, and then yeah, short paragraphs, like one sentence paragraphs, like new line break, new paragraph, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's very different from an English email, I think. Although I don't know, emails in American workplaces are interesting topic as well. But
Sure.
well, man, this was really interesting. This was absolutely fascinating, and I hope that some people got some helpful information from it. So I've got
Sure.
just 3 quick questions this season. Do you have a favorite kind of onigiri?
Oh man.
What's your go-to? You're hungry, you need a snack.
I know, I'm thinking. Probably just salmon, to be
Same,
honest with
okay.
you.
Classic.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, what's your go-to karaoke song? Japanese karaoke song.
Oh man, so I don't I've never done karaoke in Japan, to be honest with you.
Oh.
And if I did, I don't really know a song, but um that's been kind of one of my low-key goals during the pandemic. So I'm kind of working on, I mean, it's been months probably since I tried to practice, but I'm looking at two.
Mhm.
Um so I'm a huge Nujabes fan, and
Mhm.
so I kind of want to do Shiki no Uta.
Okay.
Uh, but the other one that like I said, I've never done karaoke, so I don't know how common that is. I've been told that it's almost assuredly in these books,
Sure.
but the one that I know has to be in there and that I kind of love anyway is Maria Takeuchi's Plastic Love.
Okay. I'm not familiar with those. Man, my
Yeah, oh
knowledge.
my
Yeah, I
gosh!
know. I'm
Plastic
so
Love is a
embarrassed.
Stone Cold classic. Oh my gosh.
I'm
So,
embarrassed. My knowledge of
uh,
Japanese music is very, very limited. But I'm gonna look those up. I'm gonna put links in the blog post to them. Those sound like good options, and I do think that karaoke is going to be an excellent way to build business after the pandemic. There's going to be a lot of people wanting to karaoke.
mhm. So let me just, can I go off about Plastic Love for a second
Sure,
here?
yeah.
This is actually, it's become a huge meme thing.
Mm.
So I guess the story, and you can look this up online, if you just type in like into Google, like, Maria Takeuchi, there was some sort of glitch, I guess, in YouTube, and that was out of all of the videos on YouTube, that was the song that just got recommended to like everybody. And a lot of people listened to it and really liked it. It's really catchy. It's one of these so-called city pop songs.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
it's great, and so yeah, it's probably taken an outsized place in the Western view of city pop. I
Okay.
mean, certainly Japanese people know this song. Like it was very popular, but I think to us, it's like me screaming, it's a Stone Cold classic. We have this. I don't think it was quite that influential. I mean, it might have been, but we have an outsized appreciation for it. It's great. I love it.
Nice. I will absolutely check it out. And then last question, what's something you remember from your very first first couple days in Japan?
Man, that's a tough one. Do you want like something that was unexpected or expected or that I would change?
I don't know, something vivid. It's like a vivid memory from that first trip.
So I didn't know a whole lot about Japan. I mean, now when I go, it's very different. And there weren't a lot of so my preferred hotel right now, business hotel, is the Shinagawa Prince.
Yep.
But from my memories, in 2010, very few web pages had English language websites, for foreigners to try and book rooms. And so I ended up staying at the Hotel Monterey in Ginza, and it was small. It's kind of pricey, and it's just off that major street in Ginza. I forget the name at the moment. Right, the street. And as a result, and I didn't know so much about Japan or Tokyo. And so I had no idea of what I was seeing. My entire world of this is Japan is this, one street basically. And so I thought that's what Japan was like, was, the Ginza. That's what it was for me. So and now it's obviously, as we said, we've both been to Kanazawa, we've both, I'm sure, been to many other places, but that was definitely a memory of like, oh, this is Japan, and that's totally not Japan.
Yeah. No, that's great though. That's really interesting. I think like where you go, that first trip really, until you get a little bit more exposure, really kind of will influence what you think of it. Well, great. No, thanks so much for your time. This was super interesting, and man, I admire the work you've been doing, man. It seems like it's really complicated and labor intensive, as you said.
Yeah, thank you.
So, where can people find? Is there a social presence for your website? Your law firm's website?
Yeah. So what is the Twitter account? I believe the Twitter account is Modal Law. You can see I tweet from it periodically, but I just don't, I don't really give it out that much. Sure. So it's MODAL LAW. Yeah, that's me.
And then I assume that the YouTube is similar.
Man, what's the YouTube? Well, I'll look up the YouTube while I'm telling you a little bit more. So the website is modal-law.com.
Okay.
And then the YouTube channel, what is the YouTube channel? This is like when you move and people are like, well, what's your address? And you're like, I don't know. I don't write letters to myself.
We can throw some links in the podcast description and the blog post.
Yeah, that's fine. The name of the channel, I think, is just Modal, MODAL. The two sessions that we're promoting right now are, the first one's called the AI Patent Study Group, and then parenthetically Nodal, which is not modal. It's a little pun. And the second one is Examine IRCs, which is, I'll spell it out. It's EXAMINIRKS.
Got it.
And so that's where you can find us. We're doing new content roughly every 2 weeks, but we take weeks off here and there for mostly for Japanese holidays.
Perfect. Well, great. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend and rest up. I think that second shot should be kicking in any time now.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. You can find How to Japanese on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Substack. And we'll see you next week. それではまた来週。